Welcome to the 105th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with crime writer Eric Beetner, author of the new noir novel, The Devil Doesn't Want Me, and lots of other novels and stories. Stay tuned for the interview. I also just wanted to make a quick request. I've asked this before, so I'll keep it short. If you enjoy this podcast, if you enjoy the interviews, if you could just leave a review on iTunes, it would be a huge help. Thanks, and stay tuned for the interview. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Eric Beetner. Eric is the author of several crime and noir novels. His latest novel, The Devil Doesn't Want Me, is published as an ebook by a New Dutton imprint, Gilt-Edged Mysteries. Eric's other novels include Fight Card and novels that he co-wrote with J.B. Cole, One Too Many Blows to the Head and Borrowed Trouble. He has also written many crime short stories as well. Eric, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Sure. Well, as we start out, can I have you read the first 3 or 4 paragraphs of your new novel, The Devil Doesn't Want Me?
Absolutely. Here we go. 17 years is a long damn time. A long damn time. That's how long Lars had been on the hunt for Mitchell Kenny. Mitch the Snitch, Mitch the Bitch. The former accountant gathered up quite a few nicknames since turning state's evidence 17 years ago. Lars spent his fair share of time in cemeteries over the years, and he knew the headstones didn't lie. Tempus fugit, motherfuckers. Those old Latin bastards were smart. Now I'm being replaced, he thought as he stared down into his beer glass. I guess my time has flown. The air in the bar tasted stale, equal parts nicotine and sweat. If bad breath had an address, directions would lead you here. Lars sat alone at the bar, allowing himself his weekly drink. On the job, Lars had rules. Sticking to them was how he kept getting more jobs. Doing those jobs well was how he got this one. Nicky Sr. himself picked Lars, said he needed a man he could trust. A special job, requiring a special man. And that's Lars.
Great. Well, if the listeners haven't heard of The Devil Doesn't Want Me yet, can you describe the novel for them?
Sure. I am the worst at giving out spoilers. I don't want anyone to know anything that might ruin any kind of surprise. So I'll give you a brief sketch of the very basics. But it's about this character Lars, who is a hitman for a prominent East Coast crime family. And he's been on this one assignment, which was to they sent him out to get this guy Mitchell, who had turned state's evidence against the family and now is in witness protection. So he's been on this job for the past 17 years looking for this guy all over the American Southwest. And he gets side jobs along the way. But in all that time, he's sort of been cast out on his own, and he's kind of adrift, and he's getting older. He's in his middle age. He's in his late 40s. And, he's sort of ruminating over his life. But then there's changes afoot in the crime family, some, changes in management, whether they like it or not. So they send a younger replacement for Lars to take over the job to finally get this hit done. So when Lars comes kind of face to face with this younger generation, a guy that he thinks doesn't have any respect and doesn't have any experience, they have their clashes. But the guy shows up with some new information on how to find Mitchell. And when Lars is finally confronted face to face with the guy he's been on the hunt for so long, he sort of has a realization that maybe he doesn't want to kill him anymore. And then that leads to a whole range of incidents, and Lars has to go on the run with a very special guest that he was not expecting to be taking with him, and things sort of go off the rails from there.
Okay, great. Well, with a Hitman novel, you're really following in some big footsteps with Lawrence Block and Max Allan Collins and lots of others. When you started thinking about and writing The Devil Doesn't Want Me, did you have any of this history and some of these other novels in mind? And were you kind of consciously thinking about how your novel would differ or share some traits with them?
Absolutely, and it terrified me. Those are big shoes to fill. And I think, obviously the idea of a hitman has been very romanticized, and it's a fascinating type of character. So, but I think people will keep coming back to it. So I couldn't resist on one level, but hopefully Lars is a little bit different. My aesthetic for what makes an interesting crime novel and what makes something, have that noir feel, it is the guys sort of on the fringes and in the margins. Lars is very good at his job. He's built up a lot of respect through his years of experience. But I personally could never write a novel about the world's greatest assassin and the guy who can, shoot someone right through the eye from 800 yards. And, I would never write the hitman who travels all over Europe and takes out the top diplomats. Those aren't my kind of people. So Lars is, right from the very beginning, he's a little bit broken down. He's a little bit past his prime. So I think that's definitely one thing that makes him different. And I think the response that I've gotten from the novel, from all the early readers, they're almost a little bit surprised that the novel has some heart to it. I think Lars, for someone who does terrible things for a living, comes off as a very sympathetic character, and that was very important to me. And I think that's, in a way, it's the mark of some of the great hitman novels. I think, like you mentioned, Max Allan Collins with his Quarry novels. That's a character who you are absolutely on his side, despite what he does that we might all think is maybe not morally correct. So that was definitely my key thing to do, was to make Lars someone who the reader has sympathies for and can relate to.
Right. So I'm curious about kind of your personal story. How did you get started writing fiction, and what drew you to eventually to crime and war fiction?
Well, I am from a film and TV background. My day job is working in television right now. I'm an editor and sometimes producer, and I have written for TV before. Thankfully, I don't think you can even track that stuff down over the internet. I hope not. But so I started off as a film guy, and I was a screenwriter for a number of years. So I've always, and ever since my early 20s, ever since college. So I've written a lot of screenplays, 16 feature-length screenplays. Of course, nothing that ever got made. So I sort of ground through the mill of the Hollywood system and got spit out the other end, a little disillusioned and kind of sick and tired of beating my head against that wall. And I'd always had, I think, that mythical vision of the novel that everyone kind of puts out there. Oh, it's so difficult. Oh my gosh, a novel. Oh, you've been working on it for years. And you just have this image of people in the Upper West Side of Manhattan in tweed jackets, and they're sitting at their desk for 2, 3, 4, 10 years sometimes working on their masterpiece. And it just seemed too intimidating. Screenplays are so skeletal and they're mostly dialogue. So I had gone through story and structure and pace and all that stuff many, many, many times over, but I just never felt that I had the head for all the details that you needed to write a novel. But when I turned and got more interested in that and wanted to try my hand at it, I just sort of dug in and started writing. I started with short stories, as everyone should. So I wrote a bunch of those and thought, oh yeah, well, maybe I can do this. And then when I started my first novel, I didn't tell anyone I was writing it, because especially in Hollywood, the worst thing in the world is that every waiter you meet, everybody on the street corner has a screenplay that they're working on, and they'll tell you all about it, whether you asked or not. So I'm very conscious of not being that guy who tells you about his work in progress, and then never finishes it, because that's what happens more often than not. So I sort of silently went about my business late at night and, typed and typed and typed until I got to the end of my first novel. And I sort of said, oh, well, that wasn't so hard. I can do this. And, proceeded to take that novel, put it in a drawer, and no one will ever read it because it's not that good. But it was the confidence that I needed to say, sure, I can do this. Let me give it a shot. And then, as for crime, it just happened to be the thing that I was reading and the thing that I responded to. Like I say, in the film world, I was always interested in grittier stories. I'm a huge fan of classic film noir. I've done a lot of work in the past with the Film Noir Foundation, which I think everyone should get involved with in preserving these films. And it's great living in Los Angeles. I actually get a chance to see a lot of these classic films on the big screen, and just those stories were more interesting to me for one reason or another. And I think in screenwriting, I kind of genre hopped a lot, and I wrote a little bit of everything. And to my detriment, I think people don't necessarily want that from a writer in a lot of cases. So when I started writing, more long form fiction, I felt not that I had to pick a genre and go with it, but this was what interested me, and this is where my sensibilities lied. So I wanted to stick with it and get known for one thing and practice that one thing and try to get as good as I could at it.
Great. Well, you just mentioned that you wrote, and I know you've published many short stories. Can you talk about some of the anthologies that you've been published in, and how do you like writing short stories compared to now longer works, novels and novellas?
Yeah, I love short stories. It's the exercise almost for writing a novel. It's like if you want to run a marathon, you have to run a bunch of 5Ks first, and you have to start somewhere. So it's the tremendous practice, and a lot of writers find short stories very difficult because of the economy of words. To be able to tell something that has a beginning, middle, and end in such a short amount of time, it can be very difficult. I love it, but the anthologies that I've been in, it's been one of the most gratifying things. It is such an honor to be invited into a group of writers that you know and admire and love, and to know that your story is put alongside these other great stories. It's always so exciting for me. I just got the news this week that I made it into 2 different anthologies that'll be coming out a little later, and it's a thrill every single time. But some of the stuff that I've been in the past is just fantastic collections. There's one called Pulp Inc. It now has a volume 2, Pulp Inc. 2. Both of those are fantastic collections. There's one that I did called Dict. It was edited by Greg Bardsley and Jedediah Ayers and Kieran Shea. That Greg had emailed me and invited me into this thing. They had this crazy idea. They were going to do a noir anthology, and the inspiration was Dick Cheney, and that was all they told us was that's your inspiration. Write whatever you want, and it was a crazy idea. So I had to be involved. So I wrote, I think 3, maybe 4. I think I started even up to 4 different stories, trying to think, okay, what's my take on this, and what is everybody else going to do? I felt such pressure, and then finally, the story that I hit on, and the one that they published, is the strangest thing I've ever written. I think by far, it's a story. It's called Blackheart, and it's narrated by Dick Cheney's heart, which we all know is not healthy. And so, we were all kind of amazed that anthology didn't maybe get more attention and get picked up by news outlets. But I'm sure that everyone involved in that is probably on some kind of FBI watch list now. But there's been so many more that I've been so lucky to be involved in. Off the Record 1 and 2, which is an anthology that benefits charities. Grimm Tales, which was an anthology using Grimm's fairy tales as an inspiration. So I did a very, very dark take on Cinderella. A Discount Noir, which the only prompt on that was write a story that takes place in a Walmart. So I've been really, really lucky with the anthologies, and fortunately I've got a few more coming out, and I'm going to keep submitting wherever I can.
That's great. That's great. Can you talk a little bit about your writing process? Is there a certain time of day that you write, and what's kind of your workflow? Do you use Microsoft Word or other software? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm a night writer. Like I said, I have a day job. I have 2 kids. So I write between, probably 10 and 1 a.m. I'd like to say I sit down and work diligently for that whole time, but I probably don't. But my process is just sort of to sit down and try to do it and try to be consistent about it. I'm not one of those guys who forces myself to write every day, because a lot of times I'm just tired. And if I need a day off, I'll take a day off. And so I try not to be too working in the salt mines about it.
Right.
But when I do write, I write fairly quickly. I mean, I can pretty easily knock out about 2,000 words a night, even in that short time. When I'm really rolling, I'm about 3/4 of the way through a new novel now that just really picked up pace, and I think I've done about 10,000 words in the last week. So that's pretty good. But process wise, I'm an outliner. I like to know where I'm going. I outline very skeletally, and sometimes I'll just say, oh, he goes to her apartment will be in my outline, and then that'll turn into 6,000 words or whatever it is. And outlines are a place for me to know where I'm driving toward, but they're also very flexible. I have no qualms about changing something, or a character pops up that I go, ooh, this guy's fun to write. Let's have more with him or her.
Right.
So I try to be treat it as like a job, I guess, because my the other thing is my day job I love it, and it's creative. I know a lot of people work a day job that's just sort of a grind and it's just a paycheck job, and they need the writing as their creative outlet. And I'm incredibly fortunate to have a day job that allows me to be creative, allows me to use that part of my brain. So sometimes I need to come home and veg out, watch a couple TV shows, stare at more screens for some reason, which is probably terrible for me, and then I can sit down and write the darkest, most twisted things I can.
So I mentioned earlier, sorry, go ahead.
It's just my wife refuses to read them because they're too dark.
Okay. Well, I mentioned earlier that you wrote this boxing novel, Fight Card. What was it about the boxing genre that kind of appealed to you?
Yeah, I've written two fight card novellas, Split Decision, and a sequel called A Mouthful of Blood. Boxing is in my family. My grandfather was a professional boxer in the 1930s. He was even state champion of Iowa, middleweight division, 1932 or 35, I think. So it's. I grew up around boxing. Hearing stories and getting to know my grandfather and watching fights with him, where he would criticize any fighter. His technique. If Muhammad Ali was fighting on TV, he would have something to say about what he was doing wrong, which was funny to me. And I think the first novel that I got published, One Too Many Blows to the Head, that I co-wrote with J.B. Cole, a fantastic writer. The character that I wrote is a former boxer, so it's around the boxing world. There's not a whole lot of in the ring action, but Paul Bishop, who was half the team with Mel Odom, who began the Fight Card series, was aware of that book, read that book, liked it, thankfully. And he and I, funny enough, were working on a television project together. He was on-screen talent, and I was the supervising editor, and I got to go on set and do some field producing for that. And on the last day of shooting, we were on location in Chicago. He approached me. He said, "Hey, you don't write novels, do you?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, that is you." And we sort of realized that we had this connection. I was like, "You're Bish's Beat? I love that website." And I knew his Faye Croker novels, and so I got invited into the Fight Card family very early on. So Split Decision was only the third Fight Card book that's out there, and I think now there's almost a dozen or over a dozen. It just keeps rolling on, and they're all so good. They're all such great pulp fun. You don't need to be a boxing fan to like them, but it's actually, and Fight Card is really interesting to see all the different ways that the boxing world, the wider world, can be used to tell a noir story. And it really, you get the whole cross section of how rich this world is and ripe for the picking for a great crime or noir story, just at every angle that you take from the boxing world for whatever reason it is. it's the perfect setting for a noir story.
Right. Well, you mentioned a moment ago that you had co-written some novels with J.B. Cole. How did that come about, and what's that process like for you that may be different from your solo novels?
It's very different from probably most anyone else because JB, her name's Jennifer. We've never met, and we've never even spoken on the phone at this point. And we've written and published 2 novels together. We've written a third that is still unpublished, but it began because, like I said, I was doing some work for the Film Noir Foundation, running some of their social media websites. And this is back when MySpace was actually a thing. And Jennifer contacted me through that MySpace page asking if she could link to that page from her author website because she wanted to support the Film Noir Foundation. I said, "Oh, of course, please do." And I went to her site and I checked it out. And she had one book published called The Deputy's Widow that is, a 1940s set PI novel. Sounded right up my alley because I'm such a fan of the old pulp style. So I supported an independent author and bought the book, really liked it, wrote her a note to say, "Hey, I really like this. Good job." And, told her that I wrote as well. She asked to read something. So I sent her a short story of mine that has done, that short story has gotten me a lot of places. Actually, that short story ended up in Thuglit, the great online magazine, and then got chosen, and it was actually published in the Million Writers Award Best New Online Voices anthology. It's called Ditch. But so she wrote me back and said, "Hey, I really love this story." And it was her idea. She said, "Have you ever considered writing something with someone?" And so we just decided to go for it because she lives on the East Coast. I live on the West Coast. There was no harm, no foul if it didn't work out. And so we just started exchanging ideas all over email, and we sort of dove in and started writing. And we split it up. It's 2 first-person narratives. So I would write a chapter from my character's point of view, and then she would write a chapter from her character's point of view, and we would just trade back and forth and watch the story evolve. Like we had an outline, but it was just a great moment of discovery when I would see a new chapter pop up in my inbox, and I got to read that, and then that would maybe influence my next chapter a little bit, and it just went so smoothly. We said, "This was fun. Let's do it again." So and we were very fortunate to find a small independent publisher called Second Wind Publishing, picked up the first book and then put out the sequel. It's just been a great working relationship, and probably we both have agreed it probably works better because we don't see each other and we're not sitting in the same room, and it's been great, and I hope to keep doing it for a long time.
That's great. That's great. Well, there seems to be a thriving movement of new noir and crime writers, especially people who are doing things electronically or publishing in online magazines such as Thuglit. Who are some of the other writers, even if they're not crime novelists, that you're reading now and excited about?
Well, you're absolutely right. We are in, I think, a new noir renaissance that we haven't seen since the days of Black Mask and Dime Detective. It's been great. All these online journals and sites like Twist of Noir and Plots with Guns and things like that. Some of the writers that I've been reading lately are on Snubnose Press, which is a indie press that I'm a part of. I have a novella called Dig Two Graves out with Snubnose, and my short story collection, A Bouquet of Bullets, is out with Snubnose. And Brian Lindenmuth, who is the publisher, and he's also the man behind Spine Tingler magazine online, he somehow has suckered me into being art director for Snubnose. So I've been designing the book covers, and Brian has such a great editorial eye and for picking stories that he wants to publish. So I've just been so steeped in all the different Snubnose releases that we're just keep shooting out the door. And there's been some great stuff. Most recently there was a novella called Piggyback by a guy named Tom Pitts, which is just a great, fun, dark noir ride. A book called The Subtle Arts of Brutality by Ryan Sales. There's been some fantastic short story collections. The First Cut by a guy named John Kenyon, Old School by a guy named Dan O'Shea. Keith Rawson, who's a writer that a lot of people in the online short story world know. He's got 2 collections out there through Snubnose, and Keith is just a very, very dark writer. Hold on to your hat when you read these things. So yeah, I've been really, really steeped in the Snubnose press world, and I recommend anyone who likes dark stories and real gritty noir, and then there's also some really different stuff. Brian, the great thing about indie presses is that you have the freedom to publish some stuff that has fallen through the cracks of the big publishers, and that's what Brian was all about when he started Snubnose. And he published a thing called Nothing Matters. It's a 20,000 word noir poem by a guy named Steve Finbow. And it's one of those books that you read and it's so completely different. And you think this would never have found a life outside of ebook publishing and indie publishing. And it's so great to see works like that having at least their small chance to get out there in the world. That's been great to see.
That's great. Well, given your success to date with publishing your fiction, what advice would you have for aspiring writers?
Don't do it. There's enough of us out here clogging the drain. So if you're, my take on aspiring writers, I think if you're an aspiring writer, you can just stay home because writers write, and almost all the writers that I know who've been published and who've written multiple books, and from people who are still slugging it out in the indie world to big bestsellers, they all wrote first and then sought publishing later. They all would do it even if they weren't getting paid. They all have treated it like a craft and worked to improve their craft and treat it very seriously, and not just writing something because they think they're going to get rich, because you're not going to get rich in this unless you're that less than 1%. It's just like being a movie star. Like every actor in the world wants to be Tom Hanks, and it's just not going to happen. So if you're truly a writer, not aspiring, and like I say, this gets back to the same thing I was saying before about like the people who talk about what they're writing, but probably never finish it and never follow through. So I think if you want to be a writer, then sit down and start to write. And if you're getting it done and you're putting words on the page, then you can call yourself a writer. But I get very angry when people call themselves writers and they haven't finished anything. And it's not even that you need to be published. You don't need to be published. You don't need to have a big book contract, but are you writing? Are you sit down? Are you putting words on the page? Are you working to get better every day? Then you can be a writer. And the publishing and getting your work out there and getting it in front of people, that will come later. And if there is any like actual advice, it's just that it's get your work out there, get it in front of people. Don't be afraid. Don't be shy. Don't sit on it. I mean, all the successes that I've had, which are still very minor, I still have a long way to go. I have a lot of aspirations and I'm never satisfied with my own work. Everything that I've accomplished in a fairly short time has been all my own doing, just in getting the work out there and getting it seen and taking every advantage and being nice to everyone that I meet in the industry who is willing to give me a hand up, because so many people have been so good to me. So if someone is offering a hand up, I will take it and I will try to pay that forward and repay the favor. But at the end of the day, it's all about sitting down and just keep writing, because I've got thousands and thousands of pages yet to be published that's just waiting in the wings. So it takes a lot of work to get even to the small, on top of the small hill where I am. So
great. Well, what are you working on now?
Oh, well, I have plans for a sequel to The Devil Doesn't Want Me. We'll see how many we sell and if the public actually wants that. But there are plans to continue this story. I think I've I know how to do it and do it well. But like I say, I've got there are 4 other manuscripts that are sitting there waiting to find their home. I'm working on a new novel right now that I write mostly standalones. I like stories where anything could happen and anybody could die on any particular page. So I like to keep it unpredictable like that. But yeah, I'm always working on something and more short stories, and I've got outlines for I think the next 3 or 4 novels. There's never a shortage of ideas.
Well, where can people find you online?
Well, I've on my blog, ericbeetner.blogspot.com. I try to update that with links to all the short stories that you can read for free. I've got over 50 short stories online at various places that you can read totally for free. And then obviously, all my books are on Amazon and also for the Nook. And come find me on Facebook and Twitter. I love to talk to readers and love to interact. And that's part of the fun, is to be able to, at least in a virtual way, get out of my tiny little office here and actually talk to humans.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Eric Beetner, author of The Devil Doesn't Want Me, which is available as an ebook now, and I'll have links to that in the show notes, so you should definitely check it out and download it. So, Eric, thanks for doing the interview.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It was a real pleasure.
Sure.
Susan, it's so great to finally be able to get together again.
Oh, it sure is. And I really appreciate you picking up the bill.
I'm happy to. I've got the extra cash. Since we've all been driving so much more again, I've been using Get Upside, the free gas app that pays you cash back for every gallon of gas you buy.
Wait a minute. Are you saying you actually get paid cash when you buy gas with the Get Upside app?
Yes, up to 25 cents a gallon. Cash back every time I buy gas.
Does that actually add up to anything?
Some months I make $200 to $300.
Wow, that's serious extra cash. I'm downloading the free Get Upside app now.
Download the free Get Upside app now in the App Store or Google Play to save up to 25 cents a gallon when you buy gas. Use promo code PHIL for a 25 cents a gallon bonus on your first tank. That's up to 50 cents a gallon on your next fill-up. You can cash out anytime to PayPal or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app and use promo code PHIL for a 25 cents a gallon bonus on your first tank. That's code PHIL.